Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all a little bit today. And I wanted to really kind of spend some time with you and walk through the history of the student housing projects and the incentives that we've done and kind of segue into our current version of the commercial development incentive program. Kind of give you the history and the overview of how we got here. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the existing projects that have been incentivized by the city, the ones that are currently out of the ground or operational, and then kind of what is proposed and in the pipeline. And once we cover all that, then we can spend a little bit of time and discuss kind of what council's thoughts are on where we are with capacity and maybe where y'all are interested in making adjustments or taking the program going forward. I think really what this presentation will kind of address is the history of the student housing incentives, and then kind of from a financial perspective, how they benefit the city, and then kind of some of the overall capacity that we have through those. So I'm gonna screen share here real quick and get this presentation up. Okay, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's the presentation of the analysis. We'll go through the overview first of the previous and current program resolutions. So the student housing incentive was initially rolled out in 2014. Interestingly enough, when we adopted this, it was not a student housing program. It was probably more originally aligned to what we have now with the commercial development incentive. So it was specified for large brick and mortar investment in development, $40 million and up. Student housing was not initially specified as the purpose. And I think that original resolution probably predates my time as director of the office, but you can see some of the requirements that we had there. Large capital investment, high density, really encouraging downtown urban development, the $40 million original brick and mortar cost. And then at some point, I guess from what I recall is a lot of the initial interest we had in this program did come from student housing developers. And so in 2014-045, we amended the original resolution and narrowed that down to apply only to student housing projects. And at that point, Bull Street had been excluded from the original program. The other caveat through that resolution was that we allowed Bull Street to qualify for these incentives as well. That program was open for about 2 years, I think in early to mid 2015. Oh, wait, no. We did change the program back at one point, resolution 2014-049. We re-amended it to allow for the inclusion of comparable market rate apartment projects. And at that point, we put the sunset provision in there for December 31st of 2015. So the initial program ran for all of about 2 years. In 2018, Rain Living had shown up in Columbia, and they had expressed interest in they were aware that we had done this program before for about 4 other successful developments. And so they came in 2018 and had a project they were looking at on Shop Road and wanted to do this project in the city. And I think, through their work, through Hainsworth, Sinclair, Boyd, they approached both city and county council. They managed to generate enough interest in their discussions where we did briefly reopen this program for about 4 or 5 months. It reopened their original resolution, and we allowed Rain Living to come in. This was our 5th student housing project. And they came in and located at the old warehouse out there on Shop Road now near Williams-Brice Stadium. Part of the caveat that allowed them to do this was they actually took a reduced tax credit percentage for their project. So instead of the blanket 50% that the other projects got, they only got 33%. I think they did have some other public benefits with their project that made it attractive. They invested in some community center out in South Columbia at the county council's request, and maybe some other benefits that they provided as well. That resolution was closed shortly thereafter, a few months later, and that was the end of the official student housing incentives as we know it. What we're dealing with now is we've got the commercial development incentive program, which was started in 2019. And you can see the parameters that we've set forth in place for this. It's generally in line with the program criteria that we've had before. Allows for the 50% tax credit. It establishes the taxable investment must exceed $30 million. It allows for inclusion of affordable workforce housing for consideration as well. All projects are considered on a case-by-case basis. I think what we're dealing with now is because it's commercial development, student housing is not excluded from this. Student housing is taxed at the 6% assessment rate, just as multifamily, a mixed-use project would be. And so we are continuing to get interest from student housing developers. And as of right now, they are allowed to approach city and county council with their project just as anyone else would. And so,
I'm sorry, Brian, can I get you to stop right there for a quick thing, if you can go back? So I guess one of the things with this particular situation that led me to be, I mean, there were a couple things, but that led me to be more favorable later is the fact that everything that the developer went through as far as going through the, checking all the boxes and then feeling like they've invested a certain amount. I see that we have eligibility is considered on a case-by-case basis. Just wondering if there is, if there should be some clear language, if we decide to continue this, if there should be some clear language that, I mean, to me, as I read that, that certainly would tell a developer that this doesn't mean that you're going to get approved, but I think that it needs to be clear that any investments, any due diligence that is done certainly is at the developer's, own risk. And I know Will knows this from the development world. Most developers do understand that, but I do think that this developer was pretty much led to believe that, if I check all the boxes, this will be approved. And so I think as a business friendly city, we don't want that kind of expectation. So I'm just kind of wondering from your thought process, is there a language that could be changed to not give that expectation? Or, is it clear it's just, at the risk of the developer to make those assumptions at their own risk?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And, based on the way that it's written, it's a 2-page document that we have that kind of provides that upfront criteria and guidelines. I mean, I think if y'all have the interest, we could certainly strengthen that language. It's probably closer to the bottom, so we could make sure that it's placed in there more prominently at the end of the day. So, if student housing in particular, has an elevated bar that it needs to get over, I mean, I think we can be a little more upfront about how we communicate that to people in that document. And in my conversations, we're still getting calls from student housing developers who are interested, and I'm very clear with them, that we're a little worried about saturation with these projects right now. That student housing in particular is being scrutinized a little bit more because we obviously don't want to build too much of it and then not have the demand for it down the road. And that if they are interested in continuing to bring these types of projects forward, that they need to really focus on the other public benefits that they're providing. So, are you including affordable or workforce housing? Are you doing other public improvements, including parking. But yeah, if y'all would like for us to strengthen and improve upon that, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, Ryan, I agree with Tamika. If we have some verbiage now, you may want to share that with us before you maybe let's see what the language really is.
Sure.
Before you take a crack at it.
Sure.
I just don't have a recall on the language. But,
okay.
But
yeah,
it makes sense.
I can pull that document up here in a little bit and
yeah. And, okay. Or you can share it between now and the time you want to.
Yes, sir.
Take a stab at it.
Chairman Davis, can I ask a question to Ryan? Ryan, you talked about public benefit. Can you back up and, inform us, inform the public on the idea of the incentive has to have a layer of public benefit and public infrastructure. What form has that taken in the past? And has it grown? Has it grown smaller as these projects have gone on?
Public benefit is treated pretty broadly with regards to how we look at it. I mean, I think we've looked at it in the general sense of, we're taking underutilized property, we're placing it into a higher and better use than where it was. And, public benefit can be anything from creating tax revenue, creating utility revenue, creating housing where there is a need, jobs. So it gets pretty broadly applied. We don't really specify on that. Now, when I think of additional public benefit, we expect each one of these projects to generate taxes, generate utilities, create some jobs, and create some housing. I think we also like to look at public benefit as far as what is above and beyond what's normally expected. So are they creating parking that's going to be able to be used by the public? Are they creating traffic or right-of-way of improvements that will make those things flow easier? Are they enhancing safety? Are they remediating brownfields? So, you've kind of got your standard public benefit that's going to go with any of these just because you're transforming that property into a better use. I think you also need to think about that above what is the elevated public benefit. So what's the icing that they're getting on top of that cake, as well as just, we're putting property back on the tax rolls. We don't necessarily specify that as is. I mean, I think as you can see there, we kind of added in as a conclusion for as an inclusion for, additional consideration. But if it's something that, needs to be spelled out and specified more to say that, hey, we're giving more weight if you're bringing more value add, then, that's something we're open to talking with y'all about.
I think that'd be wonderful to research and possibly include, whether it's stormwater, water infrastructure that goes along with the private development, the environmental cleanup that the developer at the Bomber Stadium is offering, I think is a wonderful, you say icing on the cake. I completely agree with you on that. Spelling that out in whatever form we move forward with our incentive package, I think would be great. So I would ask you to maybe come up with some of those true line items to include in the language.
Yeah, and that may just be as easy as, we've got a standardized application that they turn in to receive this incentive. I think we could probably create an additional section in there where the developer really has to specify, well, here's how I'm going above and beyond, through, like you said, with the Capital City Stadium by making those downstream improvements and whatnot.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. So I will move through to here's the overview of the projects that we've done to date. So these are all 5 projects that were done up through 2018. As of right now, they are all open in some way, shape, or form and are operational. Formerly, 6 student housing projects have received the tax credit incentive since 2014. 5 are open. The 6th one that is not open but has received it is the Clayco, the project next to Richland Library. Lofts on Lincoln would be the 7th of these. And I do kind of want to specify, you know, I don't know if it was in a previous iteration of the Lofts on Lincoln project or not, but right now they are categorized as a market rate housing project. They are renting by the unit as opposed to the bed count. And so they've made that change. And that's really kind of how we delineate, you know, what's, you know, a multifamily housing project versus what we classify as a student housing project. You know, are you leasing by the unit versus are you leasing by the bed? And
Well, is that the only box that they checked for us to distinguish between student housing and market rate? I mean, they're essentially, we put it on the developer to tell us that they're not student housing.
Yeah, that's just kind of how it's been classified up until now. And I don't know that we've ever gotten to the discussion. I'm not really sure, you know, how else you would go about kind of bisecting that and segmenting, you know, segmenting it from a technical standpoint.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Ryan and Councilman Brennan, this is Missy. I do want to add that some of these projects have the zoning of private dormitory, meaning there's 4 bedrooms, and others do not. And from a zoning standpoint, that's one of the distinguishing factors as well.
And is that a special, do they go through the special exception process to get those?
I believe so, but I'll confirm that. I know that they have to meet criteria that there's certain projects that can't even apply because they may be close in proximity to residential areas. But let me find out while y'all are talking if that's a special exception or not.
See, I'm on the line.
Oh, great, Krista. All right, go ahead.
It depends on their location and the density as to whether it's a special exception. So some are, some are not.
When's the last one we did for that exception?
The edge
The edge.
on Assembly.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we pulled the taxable investment numbers from Richland County for the past year. These 5 projects, as right now, represent $182 million in taxable assessed investment. That number's probably a little bit low. Rain Living had to delay their 2020 open date due to COVID. The assessed value that I pulled for them was about $4 to $4.5 million. I think they are technically slated now to have their official open in fall of 2021. And so my expectation would be that number does increase by the end of the year. We may see over $200 million by the end of 2021. After the tax credit is applied, the projects generate 2.7 million in property tax revenue, and the city receives 17% of those revenues. So about $470,000 coming to the city this past year. Those 5 total projects generated $32,000 in business license fees, and the average annual water sewer revenue for the projects is about $570,000. That's a gross number of just what we receive as far as water, sewer, and stormwater fees.
And Ryan, essentially the county gets the same 17% for that 470 number?
Generally, yes. Their millage may be higher, so they're closer to kind of 20%, but roughly.
Okay, and school districts take the rest, correct?
Yes, sir. Well, and you know the special millages that are applied as well.
Right, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Here's just some general information. Gives you kind of an overview of the 5 projects as is. and where they're located. Most of those downtown, Vista area, extending from station at 5 Points out towards Rain living at the stadium. And probably one of the slides y'all will be more interested in. So here's really what your capacity looks like across these 5 projects. Number of units is just north of 1,000 units, and that's 3,228 beds worth of capacity.
Rain's got a lazy river, Sam. We ought to go check it out.
Yeah. Let me this. I like this the charting you've done on these. Number of units. Tell me about the units again. That's would the quad setups count as a unit?
A quad would count as a single unit and 4 separate
Single.
beds.
Okay. Okay. All right. And you're not counting heads at all, just the structure and the
Beds would be the most accurate.
beds would be the
assessment.
closest to
And
heads.
you know, it's been a while since we've looked at some of the occupancy rates for these. From what I recall, over a year ago, before COVID kicked in, I mean, the occupancy for most all of these projects was in the high 90 range. So I think you could pretty relatively safely assume that if you know there's 3,000 plus beds worth of capacity, that's about how many students are in there. Rain may be a little off from that number just because, like I said, they were kind of challenged in their opening time. But I think the rest of them would be pretty accurate measures.
Thank you.
And then here's just an overview of where those taxable value numbers that I mentioned earlier. So you can see the taxable value listed on the Richland County Assessor site from each project. You can see the amount of tax credit that was applied to all of those. The overall property taxes after the tax credit is applied, and then the individual tax revenue that each applied to the city. And then we've also got the fees and utilities for those. So we've broken out kind of the overall license fees and provided kind of an average annual fee that that these tend to generate. They're typically all in the $6,000 to $7,000 range. You can see the utility numbers that were provided and kind of an annual breakout, of what they generate one-on-one for utilities. I will say,
When you say utilities, that's just water and sewer?
Water, sewer, and stormwater is
Okay.
included in that.
Yeah. Okay.
And the one that I will point out is Green Crossing. Going back to check and verify this, because Green Crossing is located in 3 different buildings. We pulled the number for that. I feel like this utility number is probably actually a little bit low because they have about the same unit and bed count as some of the other projects. So I would think that their utility numbers and their average annual utilities are higher than this. I'm working with the customer care department to go back and verify and make sure that we captured all of their information there. And then, like I said, rain is below, obviously, because of the partial year. And then I must have an older version of the slide deck. Here's the housing details for what is currently proposed, the Edge project, which will be beside Richland County Library, and then lofts on Lincoln. Yeah, this is definitely, I grabbed the older version. Proposed student housing capacity, number of units, number of beds. I think lofts on Lincoln, I've got 278 as their unit count, and I want to say the number of beds that they have is around 630. I believe it's pretty consistent with where the edge is as well. And then just kind of did just some general math to try to figure out, roughly what these generate now and what the expectation would be for taxable investment. Should both of these move forward and be approved. Right now, the edge between the 8 properties that they have, we get about $5,000 in annual revenue to the city from taxes alone. With an $80 million investment, and we discount that down to 80% to get a more accurate assessment of what, the assessed taxable value will be. So for an $80 million investment, we take that down to about $64 million. The property taxes would be a little over $1 million, and we would expect to see kind of in the range of 170, 180 tax revenue to the city. That does not necessarily include local option sales tax, so that number may drop a little bit from there as well. But it's a good starting point, as far as a taxable assessment on what we would think. And the same could be said for Lofts on Lincoln. $72 million project, discounted down by 80% is $57,600. We would be looking in the range of around $160,000 in tax revenue to the city. And that's kind of what we've got there. As far as just the overall financial impact of the student housing projects. So I feel like council's probably a little more interested, in discussing, where the capacity is, given what we've approved so far, what's in the pipeline, and then maybe future demand. And I think, to answer for something like that, you'd really be kind of doing more of a deep dive into your overall housing market, the amount of multifamily and single family residential rentals that you have, student housing projects, to include what the university has available. And that is just probably more in depth and technical than, we can get to from the economic development side. But I'm glad to answer any of the other questions, around the incentives or financials of these.
So Ryan, a couple thoughts that I had, and Chairman Davis and Councilman Brennan. I never doubted the fact that this deal needed to be done in order to incentivize and create a value on properties that were our tax structure just did not support. And I think it's done its job. I guess that's where I am, is like, how much further do we go, or have we primed the pump enough that projects, if there is still a need, can projects still happen without that? I mean, I think that it sounds like, Ryan, and this is of course the student housing ones, when we sunset the one that was just for student housing and did this one, I think the intent was using the model for student housing to incentivize other projects, commercial development projects. So based on what you're getting, I know you said you're still getting a lot of calls from student housing, is it us that we're not putting it out there to other commercial developers that this tool is available? Is it that this tool isn't attractive to other commercial developers? Or are you getting commercial developers calling about this, but they're just not coming through the pipeline yet? Because to me, it just seems like it does seem, although we expanded the project, it seems like it's being more so used by student housing developers. And my concern is that saturation, and whether or not there's going to be a bubble that ultimately bursts, and then where we have all these units that are not being occupied, and what happens there. And so That's kind of my thought. I don't doubt that it's been a good project. I think certainly we can see from the taxes that we are getting that it's helpful and beneficial to the city. But at what point, do we pivot from having this be the product that continues to come through and get more commercial development that we know we need?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's a bit of a, that the analysis for that's probably more technical than I can answer to, and it's a bit of, a subjective question as far as, how much is enough, how much is too much, and when do we cross that threshold? I mean, that's why I've tried to be pretty clear, as they continue to approach it, that the interest to continue to do more student housing is diminished. I think we obviously want to continue to do more multifamily projects, and that we would like to see those, but I'm not at a point to where I can tell somebody, no, we're not going to do that, and it's still allowed, or that if you're going to do this, we have, these X additional amount of criteria that you need to achieve for your project to get serious consideration. And that's kind of where I would look to y'all for, some guidance of how you want to shape that going forward. I mean, if the interest is not to do student housing anymore, it's honestly easier for us if we increase the thresholds for it, or just say that we're not currently doing it anymore, because then we can, discontinue conversations other than going down the path with these individual developers. We don't need to spend any more time working on something that, at the end of the day, council or the public is not going to have an interest in continuing and doing. So I don't know. I don't really have a clear answer for you for how much is enough. But we're good with whatever the decision is if we want, to elevate the criteria for these. So Councilman Brennan.
I think at some point though, we probably end up with more discussions with property owners and I guess a population that's closest to an area that's being considered for student housing. As usual, we've got to the project now that's it's not student housing, but you're looking at a project that's really sort of benefiting the public good with some of the cutbacks they've mentioned that they're willing to do, and amenities, parking, the relationship with the neighborhood, the adjoining neighborhoods, benefits there, also going into improving the storm drain system. That is attractive, whether that would be purely private, for profit, or just pure student housing. And those are the caveats we would tend to look for, but that's clearly a benefit for that particular location. And so,
Mr. Davis, Chairman Davis.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. I need to unshare screen.
Yes, I wanted to, I guess, follow up with Councilwoman Devine's comment. I feel like these developers identify Columbia as a strong market for student housing because of the high rent rates that can be had. So I think that's why you see developers circling Columbia and coming here and comparing the growing student population, not just at USC, but Allen Benedict, Columbia College, the wonderful higher ed areas, colleges that we have here. So I think if you blend that with this incentive, I think that's why developers call Ryan a lot about the specific approach. What concerns me and why I'm thankful that we sent this to subcommittee is the unintended consequences that we're seeing happen from this, especially in District 3. And Sam, I'm sure you're going to start seeing it if you haven't already, in your district, is these rent rates are so high that now there's a tier system for student housing. Yes, I think some of them, Ryan, Kay, y'all can comment. I think some of them go for $1,100, $1,000 a bed. And so you're seeing landlords at every level hold back and bump up their rent rates. A wonderful example is Rosewood. Rosewood neighborhood is kind of a developer hotspot right now for student housing specific, single family, duplex, new construction. And those rent rates are high. And as a result, unfortunately, we're seeing, the workforce that we need to target is getting outpriced. So where are they going? I don't know where they're going. Casey, Columbia, Northeast. Fortunately, they're leaving the city center. So that's been my biggest concern with this I guess incentive package. Moving forward, do I think that we should incentivize market rate housing? I believe there is a need for that, but I also believe that there's a need to layer in a percentage of workforce specific units in these market rate developments. Now I can't, market rate is market rate in Columbia. Students are gonna live in apartments here in Columbia. It's the approach by developers that define it, whether it is truly market rate or student housing. As Ryan pointed to earlier, renting by the bed, check the box. We know you're renting to students. If 80%, 90% of your residents have a to believe that you're student housing. So I guess the conversation isn't about the latest projects that are going to get the incentive package. It's moving forward. Chairman Davis, how can we morph this incentive to have a percentage that is workforce friendly? When I say workforce, I think the average income, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, Tamika, if I'm wrong, the average median income for a household is $45,000 to $50,000 in the 29201 area from your affordable housing committee. Tamika, that if we can do a percentage of 80% of that income or 120 over and above dedicated to these market rate apartments, then I think that'd be a wonderful blend to go ahead and give that incentive. But for these high rent developments to come in and really maximize the property taxes that we're, I guess, giving them, future revenues that we're not getting, I think it's troubling to me. And again, it's the unintended consequences that we're seeing in Rosewood, Wales Garden, Melrose Heights, MLK, Waverly, and it's slowly having an effect throughout our city on rent rates, and not just the city, but the county. So that was my conversation with council, and Chairman, I'm glad that you sent it to this subcommittee so that we could discuss it further and figure out how to bundle this up in a different form to not be so student housing specific, but promote market rate housing with a workforce approach. Affordable housing, the low income tax credit folks, I think that's a whole different development process, because a lot of them use nonprofits, which they're already off the tax rolls. So this would be a specific market rate workforce housing initiative that I would like to move forward with this subcommittee.
And I wanted to add real quick, just because I don't know that I mentioned it when Councilwoman Devine asked earlier. I think the reason that maybe we see, an outsized interest in some of these projects is as Councilman Brennan said, we are seen as a very strong student market, given we have 55,000 college students that come through here each year. But part of my understanding is that these student housing projects get favorable financing as well, because they are able to lease by the bed. And so probably from a financial and investment standpoint, the banks, the investors that are putting money into these, I think they get treated a little more favorably, and so are the people that back them are a little more open to investing. And so you probably do see an outsized interest to doing student housing projects versus conventional multifamily rentals. At least that's kind of what I've heard.
Well, again, and that kind of layers to what Chairman Davis has seen is out of state investment and out of state property management. Look at where that's kind of gotten us into some of our communities.
Yeah, ditto to both of your points, and then to Mika's also. There's definitely a need to continue this conversation, and you're right. Areas are, their success, progress, and growth depends on who's coming in some form or fashion. But the affordable housing research that's going on now really kind of draws that circle that you're talking about. Median income and all that, it depends on how you, it depends on the project, it depends on who you're really targeting. And it has to be, I think, a well-rounded city is a city that has room, space, and amenities for everybody. And you don't necessarily want to identify people by where they live. Just because you live in an area like me doesn't mean you fit the traditional profile. That's just where you choose to live. But wherever you choose to live, I think the better we are is when people can afford to live where they want to live. But
and quality development, yeah.
Yeah, quality development, it's all relative. So our discussion, I think, continues from this point on, and we need to, I think Ryan did a good job in actually, painting that picture of property taxes versus revenue in general coming to the city. And the city's not getting as much as people think we're getting off of certain developments, But I mean, it all helps. But I think we do need to continue to talk about how we're going to maintain that relationship with developers that want to come, but at the same time, are we really getting all of the products that we need as a city, given our goals for growth and development and the quality of life that we've committed to in the future. Now that's a little philosophical, but the bottom line is still, how do we keep the development coming, and we don't run anybody away for the wrong reason? We don't want that kind of reputation, but at the same time, we've got to take under consideration impact. And impact happens no matter where you put a development. It's just a question of the size of that impact and who's in, who's out. But I think it's good that people are looking to come to Columbia for investments, but we just don't want the investments to. I think everybody needs to benefit from investment, and not be perceived as only targeting certain certain income levels. You know, Tamika?
I'm just wondering, so, I mean, what are next steps? I mean, do we want to give Ryan some direction on some amendments we want to see proposed to council, or what would be next steps?
Yeah. I don't know if we're ready to go back to council, but I think one of the outcomes here is, are we comfortable with where we want to, we are not eliminating student housing in terms of the incentives. That's number one. But I'm hearing, Ryan, that there's room for both, but it's a question of where do we want to overload one versus the other, or have give the appearance of overloading?
Yeah, I mean, your options are kind of, you know, you got three options. You can continue on as is. But you know, if the interest was there, I don't know that we would, you know, be having this conversation right now. You can outright discontinue and disallow student housing. A bit extreme, you know, but it definitely reduces the interest that's coming in from the outside. It sounds like y'all would prefer kind of a middle ground approach, which is, you know, we're open to continuing to consider these, but we want to maybe, you know, elevate, you know, that value add that these particular type of projects are going to bring. So if somebody is going to come in and they're going to rent by the bed, and they're going to, you know, market, you know, straight to students and have people co-signing, then we would like for them, you know, to meet additional public benefit criteria. And I guess the next step would be, you know, for us to continue that conversation and say, well, what are those additional criteria that we're gonna place on that? You know, and I don't know that that's an easy question to answer just right off the top. You know, different projects, you know, may locate into different parts of town, and one may bring more parking, you know, one may do, you know, brownfield or the downstream improvements. I'm not sure that that's something we're equipped to necessarily answer today, but it sounds like that's where the conversation needs to head next. And so I guess if we want to reconvene and talk about this more, we can start to put together just some ideas and concepts of different criteria that we could bring into y'all for consideration. And let y'all kind of mull on those for a while and see what resonates with y'all.
Tamika and Brother Ryan, I don't have a problem with that. You know, I think we're just right now sort of postured to say we don't have anything to take that to council yet by way of recommendation.
Right.
So talking, and let's continue to look at, well, let's pinpoint those real issues, the fundamental issues right now that we're, you know, given the conversations, housing versus the other model. And then also, I think impact is still lurking in the shadows. It's not bad, but there is impact, and we just need to understand it. It's still for staff discussions when we start to talk about growth and future development. Tamika, what do you think?
I mean, I think I like what Ryan says. Maybe he could propose some stuff. I think clearly there needs to be some amendments, raising the bar, the public ad, and, you know, and if there are student housing, because, you know, the one thing is, and the one thing that this developer kept talking about is it wasn't student housing, although it may, you know, end up being predominantly students living there. It didn't get the student housing that Kristen talked about. So, you know, that even if you don't go through the student housing, essentially it can be a student housing development if you check other boxes. So I think that we need to make sure we have whatever criteria in place that if it is going to be a multifamily or not multifamily unit, but it's going to be more attractive student housing, that we go through the same analysis that we may go through if it was outright student housing development. So I would love to see just some things based on what we've given, some suggestions that Ryan can bring forward to the committee for us to consider. And then, then we can also then add, once we see from him, some other things that we may want to look at. But I think it needs to be amended. I think that it's done its job. Is it at the point where it's ready to go away completely? No. But I also don't want a situation where people think that, all I have to do is meet these criteria and it's going to be approved, because I think case by case basis is exactly what we're doing, but that's not probably the perception that developers have. And I want to make it clear that just because you can check the boxes doesn't mean it's going to be approved for this if you don't do other things to make sure it's a smart development for that area.
And be more precise with our definition of both.
Right. And I would agree with both of y'all. That I would like to see immediately we trend away from even the word student housing and go gear up more towards a market rate with a quality of life expectation for any housing initiative incentive that we put together. Make it known pretty much now moving forward, now that the latest incentives will be granted, is we don't want to see rent by the bed, and whatever else y'all can bring forward to let us know, Ryan, of what are some of those telltale signs of a student housing developer, and just make it clear, we have expectations for the quality of life for our residential offerings. We don't want to outprice in rents all the wonderful talent that comes up through our education systems. We want to keep them here, and right now they ain't staying here. So this is a very important aspect to keeping the talent and growing our little economy here.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to the original incentive, I think really part of the genesis of that was that we had student housing interest, but where we saw it concentrating was outside of the city limits. So it was further out. It was out near the stadium. It was across, in KC, a lot of developments on there. And that may have been kind of the original light switch for flipping it and making it student housing. We wanted to pull those projects closer to the urban core, and there's a benefit from that. Having the students, closer to university, having them off the road. I mean, anything that can take another car out of the traffic in front of me in the morning, I'm gladly willing to sit behind less vehicles. And some of these have been close enough to the university where they do make it very walkable for the students as well. And I think that even Matt Kennel kind of shared with me earlier, he hears it from both sides as well, but students have been a financial benefit to Main Street and some of the businesses down there too. So there are some pros to this, but definitely understand what everyone is saying. We just need to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm the balance with the neighborhoods and the residents. And we need to strike a good balance with the policy going forward. Absolutely.
Okay, so Ryan, I guess you and your co-workers have to, maybe y'all want to sit and play with the definition of where we want to go. I'm not hearing that we need to do away entirely with student housing brand or label, but that we're looking for some sort of a balance, especially for city core. We want people to come back to maintain the core, but not, I guess, not overdo the brand. And but there's a point. I believe if you go back to our meeting last week, we talked about. Tamika was on her report for the Affordable Housing Task Force. We were looking at the AMI. We want to make sure that as we even do these kinds of development, the people that have a need for affordable housing, as we understand it, as we know it, and as we'd like to see it, that there's some incentives, you know, for development in that area as well. Follow me? Yeah,
Sir.
right. So it's not necessarily separate from what we're doing, but at the same time, that's part of that impact that I'm looking at. We want to make sure that we do maintain a good mix of residential living in the city. You agree with that, Tamika?
Yes, and I guess I would just, the other thing, what Ryan just said, I'm not opposed to housing for students, and I know students have a huge benefit on us.
Right.
You know, we actually, I don't think I'm not sure if I shared it with you guys, but we just got named the top 25 cities for Generation Z. So, you know, clearly we want to have, you know, grow that talent here. So this is not about students per se. This is, to me, it's about the saturation of the market and whether or not there's going to be some burst of this bubble at some point, and, you know, and then we have units that are not kept up. So that's my thing. So
Yeah.
wanted to make that clear.
Okay. Okay, so next step, Ryan, you're going to go back and play with that, not definition, but criteria.
Yes, sir.
And
We'll go back, we'll look at the, you know, some of the criteria we can set up, and look at some possible recommendations for value adds that we can bring, whether it's, you know, geography, public parking, the percentage of affordable workforce housing, and we'll just try to bring y'all some ideas and concepts that y'all can look at and make some decisions on.
and the check boxes for clarity.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else, Will and Tamika?
Chairman Davis, you run a good meeting. I appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, right. Okay. Staff? Anything? I guess that's not.
No, sir.
Okay.
We're good here. I think Ryan's got his marching orders.
All right. But okay, during the interim, then let's just from time to time sort of communicate on this leading up to the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for pulling that
Everybody
together,
good?
Ryan.
Everybody good?
And Kay and team.
We're good?
Thanks, team. All right.
Thank y'all.
Have a great
Thanks,
day.
y'all.